Hello and welcome to this video tutorial from blendercookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and in this video tutorial we're going to look at the process of rigging the fingers for a human hand. Now, the technique that I'm going to be using comes from a video done by Dimitri on rigging a hand, face, and so on, and this technique is used with permission. His original video tutorial was done strictly in Russian and then has a few English subtitles here and there. And so he's given me permission to essentially translate it as a new English-based tutorial. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And the way that this is going to work is we're going to be creating a single finger rig and then duplicate that rig to each of the other fingers. And the way that the rig is going to work is very, very cool because it doesn't have to use any IK constraints, any drivers, or anything like that. Instead, we're going to strictly use some simple constraints to create a very powerful finger rig that allows us to have really good control and very easily animate a finger without too much work. So let's go ahead and create the finger rig first. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just move to another layer because I don't want to worry about the hand for the time being. So I'm just going to hit 2 on my keyboard to switch to layer 2. Then I'm going to hit 7 to go on the top view on my number pad. And I'm going to hit Shift A, add armature, and single bone. With this single bone, I'm then going to go to side view, hit tab to go into edit mode, and quickly just grab the tip here and move it down to right here at 1 blender unit. And that's just holding down, hit G to move it, and holding down control to lock it to the grid. And then I'm going to go ahead and extrude this bone twice, once like this, and once like this. Again, just going out 1 unit at a time. And it's not essential to be 1 unit, it's just I'm doing that just for consistency's sake at this point, because I will then scale the bones down to adjust to the finger once I get to that point. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select my first bone here, and this would be the first joint in the finger, second joint, third, and I'm going to then duplicate this bone by hitting Shift D, hold down Control, and just move it up a couple units. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab the tip of this bone and just hit G and move it out the 3 full blender units to be the same length as the entire bone, or the entire set of bones. And so the way that this is going to work then is I'm going to add some copy rotation constraints to each one of these bones, and they're going to copy this one. So when we're done, what we'll be able to do is simply grab this one bone, rotate it alone, and curl the entire finger. So I'm going to hit tab to leave edit mode, and then Control Tab to go into what's called pose mode. And pose mode is accessible down here as well, and it's what enables us to actually pose the actual armature versus just... Within pose mode, I'm first going to select my main bone here, and then I'm going to shift right click to select the first bone in the finger. And then I'm going to go over to what's called the bone constraints panel, as you can see here. I'm going to go ahead and click Add Constraint, and I want to do a copy rotation. Now what the copy rotation does is it copies the rotation of this bone to this bone. So if I rotate this, it will eventually go ahead and rotate this bone as well. But currently, we forgot one thing, and that is when we added the constraint, it's not actually telling Blender to automatically target it to this bone. So we could manually do it through here by first choosing the whole object, which is the armature, and then choosing the bone within that armature. But instead, what we want to do, as you can see, that works there, but there's actually a much easier way to do that. And so I'm going to go ahead and just delete this so that we can demonstrate that. And that is using a keyboard shortcut. I'm first going to select this bone, then select this bone, and hit Control-Shift-C. And this brings up the menu to add constraint with targets. And so if I do a copy rotation, it immediately puts in all of this info here, such that if I just go out and rotate this bone, this one copies that rotation immediately. So this is very, very cool. Let's go ahead and add it to the next bone. So we'll select this one, then shift right click to select this one, Control-Shift-C, copy rotation, and you can see it's already put all of that in. And so now if we rotate this, you can see that they're both done. Well, this doesn't actually do us any good, because we would like this bone to add this rotation plus its own rotation onto it such that we get the curl effect. Well, right now they're both just being rotated equally. But we can fix this if we go ahead and change the space right here over to local space and local space. And now when we rotate it, you can see we're getting a curl effect. But we do have a problem in that this bone's roll angle is pointed the wrong way. So what it perceives as rotating along the x-axis is not the same from a visual standpoint as what this bone is. And the reason is we need to go ahead and adjust this roll angle. So we can fix this by hitting tab to go into edit mode. And you can see this for a fact that these second two bones are rolled 45 degrees on their side essentially. And we can fix this if we simply hit Control N with those selected, and we want to do Z-axis up. And now you'll see that it's immediately recalculated the roll on those bones, so we can hit tab to go back into pose mode. And now if we rotate this, you'll see that it works very, very nicely. So already you should be beginning to see where this is going to be going. You know, as we rotate a single bone, we can curl the entire finger, which is going to be really pretty cool. So let's go ahead and add it to the last bone. And so we're going to shift right click, select that, Control Shift C to copy the rotation. And then we'll change this over to local space and local space. And then let's go ahead and select our main bone and rotate that. And you can see what we're getting. But we want to fine tune it a little more. First off, you'll notice that our first bone has been rotated a little bit, and that's because we need to set this one over to local space as well. There we go, local space on each of those. So now if we rotate them, everything's good, but we're not getting that slight base rotation. But one thing that you'll find that we have a problem with if we want to, say, fine tune our animation, you know, maybe we want to curl the finger a little bit just for the base bone here, but then maybe we want to curl the tip a little more. Well, currently you can't do that. You know, right now it's completely locked based on this bone's rotation. So what we need to do is select this and enable the offset here, which will enable us to add its own rotation on top of this rotation. And so now you can see we can fine tune this any way that we want. So let's go ahead and enable that for all the other bones as well. There we are. So now we can rotate any one of these a littlest bit and then add on the actual rotation there as well. I'm going to real quick here before going any further, I'm going to go ahead and select everything by just double tapping A and then hit Alt R to clear the rotation just to bring it back to the default. And now let's do a couple more things before we go on to rigging our actual hand. And that is we want to limit the way that this finger can behave because the human finger can only bend certain ways. And so the first one is, you know, right now, if we rotate this around the y-axis, we actually twist the bones. Well, we don't want to do that because these shouldn't be able to twist. You know, you can't twist your fingers like that. Not without some force anyway. And so we want to go ahead and uncheck I believe it's the y-axis on this. So let's just go ahead and test that. If we uncheck the y-axis, select our main bone and hit R and Y, we can see that twist. And that is in fact what we want. So let's go ahead and disable that for each of those. And then also, if we rotate along the z-axis like this, the only bone that is able to do that in the finger is the first bone. And so let's go ahead and turn off the z-axis rotation for each the middle and the tip as well. So now if we rotate around the z-axis, you'll see that only the base bone is affected. So now we've just kind of limited the transform on some of these. But the other thing that we want to do is go ahead and limit the scale and the location of each of these. You know, as long as your finger is well rigged, or if you're going for, you know, a kind of more of a cartoony effect with stretchy fingers and things like that, your actual hand shouldn't be able to scale its fingers up, shouldn't be able to move its fingers around like this. So let's go ahead and go over to the bone panel here, and let's go ahead and lock the location for each one for our base bone. We can lock the scale for it as well, and then we'll go ahead and lock the scale on each one of these bones as well. And so now, if we try and scale it, it doesn't do anything. Same thing, if we try and move it, it doesn't do anything either. But it does do one cool thing, in that when we hit G, it automatically just enters rotation instead. And this is actually very handy because it enables us to animate the finger using either grab or rotate and getting the same effect. And so let's go ahead and do the same thing for this bone as well. Even though it's not actually deforming anything, it as well should not move or scale or anything like that. So let's go ahead and lock the location on these, lock the scale. And then we can also go ahead and lock the Y rotation as well so that it can't turn like it was before. We should be able to go along the Z axis and around the X axis though, so we'll leave those as they are. Okay, now we're getting really, really close to being ready to go ahead and rig it, but what we want to do before we rig it is now we want to go ahead and create some custom bone shapes. And the reason that we're going to go ahead and do that now is, one, we want a better visual appearance of what our bones are going to do, but also we want it to be less distracting when we animate. You know, currently with this, particularly with our big bone right here, it's huge. You know, it's basically bigger than the entire finger, and so you're going to find it very visually distracting and just gets in the way while you're animating. So let's make something that's a little simpler. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control Tab to leave pose mode. And then we'll go ahead and hit H to hide this just for the time being. Or actually, no, let's not do that. Let's go ahead and hit Alt-H to unhide that. And let's just move over to layer 3 right down here, or by hitting 3 on your keyboard. And we're going to hit Shift-A, add mesh, and I'm going to add a circle. Now I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, hit R and Y, and then 90 degrees on my number pad, and hit Enter just to rotate that along. And what I'm going to create is the same shape that Dimitri created in his. As you can see right here, it's kind of a half arc with a extruded tip right here, just to kind of show that it's almost like the shape of a knuckle. And so let's go ahead and create that. And what I'm going to do first is just hit E to extrude, scale, and just scale that down maybe 2 clicks while holding down Control. And then I will go ahead and select these 3 vertices, hit E to extrude, hold down Y to extrude out along the Y-axis, and while holding down Control, just move that out maybe about to there. And then maybe I'll go ahead and just scale that to 0 along the Y-axis by hitting S, Y, and 0. Then I want to go ahead and select these bottom vertices by just hitting B, left-click and dragging, hit X, and delete vertices. So now you can see my shape that I have right here. Okay, well let's go ahead and use this as our custom bone shape. Although actually, I'm going to go ahead and select this vertex here and just hit X and delete. And the reason I'm doing that is strictly out of personal preference, is I want this width to be the same all the way along. You could just say that I'm a little bit picky. But now what we're going to do is we want to note the name of this, and just for good practice, let's go ahead and name this, and we'll call this bone underscore shape underscore knuckle. Okay. So we'll go back over to layer 2, right click on our armature and hit Control Tab, and with our main bone selected here, let's go ahead and go over to the bone panel, which we already are already at, and we want to choose the custom shape right here. Just left click on that, we can choose bone underscore shape underscore knuckle, and you can immediately see it's scaled in. Now, obviously it's huge at the moment, and you'll also notice that we're getting some weird display in here, you know, where some of it's solid, some of it's wireframe. So let's go ahead and just check the wireframe option right there. So it'll only display the wireframe. And then let's hit Shift 3 to bring up our layer 3, and we want to go in and scale this down. So if we just hit Tab to go into edit mode, we can then scale this, and I'm going to scale it towards the cursor by hitting period on my keyboard. We can just scale this down until it's about the right size. Say right about there, should be just about good. Hit Tab to go back into edit mode, or leave edit mode, and we should be good to go. But let's go ahead and create several more shapes, because right now you can see this is very cool. If we rotate this, works well, and you can kind of see the effect that it's giving. Well, let's go ahead and add a custom shape for each one of these bones to make them as least distracting as possible. And for these ones, I'm simply going to add a simple circle. So we'll just, from the front view, in layer 3, hit Shift-A, add mesh circle. Hit Tab to go into edit mode, rotate around the X-axis 90 degrees by hitting R, X, and typing in 90. Okay, back on layer 2, let's go ahead and hit Control Tab, select our custom shape, and this one is just mesh, which we should go ahead and name that. Check the wireframe option. So let's go back to layer 3. We'll name this as bone underscore shape underscore finger. And you can see that we need to scale it way down. And we want to find this real quick. bone underscore shape underscore finger. There we are. We still need to scale it down just a little bit. Perhaps to right about there. Okay, and we may need to adjust these more as we go. Let's go ahead and add it to this one as well. And we'll check wireframe for each one of those. And now we're pretty much good to go. So, with this set, oh, actually I made that way, way too small. Actually, right about there should be just about right. Okay, so going back to layer 1 and layer 2, let's go ahead and apply this to our fingers, or to our actual mesh. So in object mode, I'm going to select my armature. I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode, select, or actually no, I'm going to, from object mode, I'm going to scale it way down to about the size of my actual hand. Then from edit mode, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate or scale this down, position it, and then duplicate each one of the fingers to work. And the reason that we've done all of our work before doing any duplication is because I want each one of my duplicates to maintain those constraints that we've already set up. And so this way, you know, I can position my finger exactly how I want it, and then just leave it at that. Okay, we'll go ahead from the side view. One thing I'm going to do to make this a little easier is go over to the armature panel here, and I'm going to enable X-ray object such that even while in shaded mode, I can see my armature. Position that just like that, and that looks good. So now let's go ahead and select all of our bones. Shift D, move it over along the X-axis. Maybe scale this up a little bit. And one thing that we might do is go ahead and use the base of this bone, or the tail, as the scaling point. So if I select it, hit Shift S and cursor to selected, I can then select all my bones, scale from the cursor with the period, scale towards the Y-axis, about like that. Looks about right. Shift D, move it over, maybe scale down. You'll notice I'm positioning the midpoints right around in here. Maybe rotate this just slightly. Shift D again, scale down along the Y-axis, and that looks pretty good. Move this over just a little bit. Move this one over as well. Move it down just slightly. With all the fingers done, or all the main fingers, we're ready to go ahead and do the thumb here. Now the thumb, we have to do a little bit carefully because we need to adjust the overall angle on these so that it fits the rotation of the thumb, but we need to do it in such a way that we're not going to mess up the roll on this. So you'll see what I mean in just a second. So let's just go ahead and duplicate this by Shift D, move it over to about the base of the joint for the thumb, rotate it around, hitting comma on the keyboard to rotate around the individual centers, rotate around, move it over, and position there. And now you might think that we would just rotate our view around such that we're at about the right angle, and then rotate like this. But you'll notice that when we do that, we're not affecting the roll at all. And so what we want to do is first go ahead and position these as best as we can, like this. I'm going to rotate this around such that the main bone is right on top. Rotate about like this. Okay, and that looks pretty good. And now you might think, well, we could just go ahead and hit Control N to recalculate our bone roll, but that's not actually the case. And the reason being is if we go ahead and hit Tab to leave edit mode, Control Tab, you'll notice that a couple things. First off, this bone is, its angle is all off, but also, when we rotate these around the x-axis, it rotates perfectly. If we rotate this around the x-axis, it doesn't. Or we could rotate around the local x-axis, but again, it rotates off. And so what we want to be able to do is have the x-axis basically, or the local x-axis, basically pointing just like this. And that's where we want to go in and affect the roll on this. And just from previous testing, I know that the roll needs to be set at about 1.2 or 120 degrees. And so you can affect this right here. And so we'll just select the bone, type in 1.2, and you can see that looks pretty much perfect. So we'll do that for each one of these. And one little tip you can do is once you set one value like you want it, just hold your mouse cursor over it, hit Control-C, select the other bone, and Control-V to just paste that in. And that works for any value field within Blender. And I accidentally copied over my original one. So there we go. And now when you're in pose mode, you'll notice that it's rotated just nicely. If we rotate around our local x-axis by hitting X or R and then X and X again, it rotates very, very nicely once more, as you can see, like so. Okay, so at this point, we have all of our bones created, and we are pretty much ready to go. But one thing that you will notice is these ones here are way too big. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to layer 3. I'm going to select this finger here. I'm going to hit Shift-D, duplicate it, scale it down in edit mode, and then we'll just go ahead and leave that at finger point 001. And then in these bones, I'm going to go ahead and change the custom shape over to the other one. And the reason that you're seeing the differences in the shapes there is that the scale of these is not only affected by the custom shape, but it's also affected by the scale of the bones. That's why you're seeing the differences between them. Okay, so with that done, we're now ready to go ahead and rig our actual hand. So I'm going to leave pose mode by hitting Control-Tab, be sure to save my file, and I'm going to right-click on the hand, and let's first start by just going over to the modifiers panel and click Add Modifier and Armature. Now, if we direct this to our armature here and select our armature, hit Control-Tab, go into pose mode, and rotate this, you'll immediately see that, well, yes, it's working. Obviously, it's not working very well. And the way that the armature modifier works by default is it uses the envelopes of the bones, or basically the radius within the bones, to decide what is going to be affected and what is not. And so as you can see, in some areas we're missing pieces, or we're grabbing pieces of other fingers. And so we're going to do this a little differently. I'm going to go ahead and delete that modifier. I'm going to leave pose mode. Then I'm going to select my hand, shift right click to select the armature, and hit Control-P and parent it to an armature deform with automatic weights. And what the automatic weights does is basically tells Blender to try and map everything in the mesh as close as possible based on all the different bones, all the bones that are in close proximity, and so on. As to how the actual algorithm works, you would have to ask the developer or someone else that knows a little bit more about that side of it. I just know that it works pretty darn well. And so if we choose that, we can go ahead and see the effect. First off, you will notice that it has added an armature modifier, but what it's also done is gone ahead and created vertex groups here that correlate to the name of the bones here. And so if we go over to our object data panel, you'll see that in the vertex groups, it's created all these different groups that each have weights applied to them as Blender best saw fit. So if we go ahead and select our hand, hit Control-Tab to go into weight paint mode, then we can select the armature, and actually we want to go ahead and first select the armature, hit it to go into pose mode, then select and go into weight paint mode. You'll notice that as we select the different bones, different weights have been applied. Now, one thing that you'll notice that I forgot to do, if we select any one of these bones, you'll notice that weights have been applied to them. Well, we don't want this because we don't want these to actually deform anything, since they are nothing more than our controllers. And so let's go ahead and select this, and we're going to delete that armature modifier. And just for good measures, let's go ahead and just remove all the groups. This isn't actually necessary, but we just want to ensure that everything's nice and clean and that we don't have any discrepancies. And so first, I'm going to go ahead and tell these bones to not deform anything. And you can do this by the bone panel here and just uncheck the deform button. And so for each one of these, we want to uncheck deform. Very quick and easy. Okay, and so now when we apply that group, the modifier through the automatic weights, it will not add groups for these bones. So now if we rotate this, let's go ahead and just try this. You can see that's actually working pretty darn well. We might see some areas, such as there, that this is moving a little too much. If we rotate this, it's rotating the entire wrist. But you can see how our finger rig actually works remarkably well. And again, props go out to Dimitri for doing this. You know, if he got it somewhere else, I'm not sure, but in the first place I saw it, and it works remarkably well. You know, we're not using any shape keys, not using any drivers, no IK constraints, and so it's very, very easy to set up and very, very quick. So the last thing I want to do in this tutorial is just look at some basic weight painting, and that's done by selecting our mesh, hit Control Tab, and then we can go ahead and hit T to bring up our toolbar, and let's just select these and start removing some of the weight on here for what's not being deformed. And so for those of you that are not familiar with weight painting is basically a way to paint onto your mesh what you want deformed and what you don't. So on this bone here, everything that's red is being 100% deformed. Everything that's dark blue is not being affected at all. And then the values in between are just that. They're the in-between values. So green is approximately 50%, yellow 70, 60, and so on. And so using our tools here, we can go ahead and paint in or paint off influence. So let's just select the subtract button, and we'll go ahead and paint out all of these areas here. You can see it's getting lighter and lighter. Well, let's go ahead and just increase our strength, either by using the slider here or by hitting Shift F and moving it down to increase the strength. And we'll just paint off those. We can paint off these. And real quick here, we'll just block out all the ones that we know that we don't want for sure, and then we can kind of gradually transition it as we go. So at that point, you know, I've got most of those blocked out. I can go ahead and rotate this while in pose mode to see how it's working. And so maybe I'll decrease the strength to pretty low, and then I'll just gradually start going in these areas. Maybe rotate this a little bit, see how it's looking. Maybe want to remove these a little bit more. Maybe lessen these areas. And so, you know, using weight paint, you can very easily create fall off in your armature to allow your transitions to be much, much smoother. There we go. Maybe we're still getting a couple areas in there. Okay, maybe we want to soften this up. I can use the mix value to try and blend in all the nearby values. Maybe remove that one again. Oops. Not actually sure what the lighten and darken values have an effect there, but maybe we'll go ahead and again subtract a little bit more here. And you can see that's actually working pretty well. Okay, now I'm not going to do too much more with this. At this point, you know, it's kind of just going in, finding what works for you, what gives you the results that you want, and of course, you know, depending on your model and what you're actually rigging at that exact time will of course have an effect on how you weight paint, what gets weight painted, and so on. But let's maybe just do a little bit more. One tip I will show you on when you're weight painting, if you don't really know how much to add in certain areas, we'll just go ahead and rotate one of the bones and then say maybe select this bone, and you can go in and interactively paint away, and as you paint it will affect the influence in real time such that you can basically just paint until the results are what you want. And so this is very, very handy and actually works quite well. So there, that's maybe not quite there. Maybe subtract these areas a little bit more. And so, you know, it's just like painting. It's very, very easy, very quick, rather tedious to some. You kind of, once you get into the groove of it, you kind of start to enjoy it a little bit more, but it can definitely be a cumbersome process, particularly depending on your model. You know, you may find that it's absolutely grueling. And so there, you know, you can test whether or not you have any rebellious areas there, such that that shouldn't be pointing up, that shouldn't be affected. We can go in, paint over these. Sometimes it's hard to tell what areas are affected, what aren't, because the values are so light at times. And so moving the bones around really help us fix that. Maybe increasing the strength. You can see that we've got a rogue vertex there. There it is. Got that out of there. can maybe improve this just a little bit by subtracting this little bit in here. We'll subtract that. And so then you go on until you get the results that you like. But at this point, you can see that we have a pretty darn effective finger rig that is really quite easy to set up. And I will go ahead and fix that because that is a little too drastic. So just remove all that very quickly. Fix all those areas in there. We'll mix all this. Maybe just subtract a very small amount at a time until I kind of improve this how I like it. Mix that just a little bit more. Do that. We can see we've got some pretty nasty results there. So we'll go in, move these areas. And every now and then you'll find that you just can't find where a vertex is at, or a vertex is, or perhaps the distortion is so bad that you're actually having to go in and it's being hidden by other parts in your mesh, at which point you can go ahead, select the bone that you want to remove from, hit tab to go into edit mode, and from the vertex panel here, just hit select. And as you can see, we've got a lot of influence on all this, so we'll maybe just go ahead and deselect the fingers here, deselect these areas. We'll go ahead and bring up circle select with C, middle click to deselect those. Make sure we don't have any other ones in here that we don't want selected. And remember, you can deselect with the circle select with the middle mouse button, and then we can simply click remove. And now, oh, nope, we're still getting some of it in there. You'll notice it's not being affected by this one though. So we go in and see which one is affecting it, and it's right there. So painting over these real quick, see if we can fix it. If not, there we are. And so this is one of the times where weight painting can be kind of cumbersome. I'm going to go ahead and find these last couple. So one thing I'll do is go to edit mode, select, deselect this area in here, and in here, just kind of in the general vicinity, because that way I can just paint those out real easily. I'm going to go ahead and click remove. We'll do that for each one of them. I'm sure that many of you have figured out already why a lot of people hate weight painting. Is not only is it there's not really an exact art to it, but it's also just kind of obnoxious. But it does get the job done, and it gets it done pretty darn well actually once you kind of get into the swing of things. It can just be a matter of getting everything to work and play nicely. Something I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Tab, select my armature, select all the bones, and hit Alt R to clear the rotation. Because now I want to go in and just modify or remove each bone one at a time to see what's being affected. And one thing you can do is just select your main finger bone to rotate it, and it will of course rotate all of the other bones, telling you what needs to be affected and or what's being affected and what's not. You can see quickly, just remove that. Okay, so that one is good. Then we can see this one. Clearly we need to do a little bit with one of these. We'll subtract those. And so you'll notice right there what was happening was somehow it got distorted and then was not going back into place. And so I left weight paint mode, went back into pose mode, cleared the rotation, which then cleared the deformation as well, and started anew. So at this point, I'm not going to take it any further just because I don't want to waste too much time. You've already seen the process. Oh, okay, we'll do a little bit more right there though. There we go, that's much better. But like I was saying, I'm not going to take too much more time. At this point, it's just a matter of fine-tuning it, getting the weights like you want them, and going from there, and then going on, of course, to animate it. So at this point, I'm just going to pose the finger in a kind of fun position. Maybe just a kind of nice, relaxed pose. And there we go. So you can see at this point, once it's all rigged, if you were to take the weight paints a little further, it's very quick to pose your finger. You can then fine tune it with our joints here. If you want to quickly, interactively pose this, you can double tap R to get your roll rotation. You can do the same thing for any one of the fingers to kind of just play with it, see what you're getting. And of course, obviously you can see we do need more weight paint work, but I'm going to leave that for outside the video. And I'll leave you with that. So with this, we've got a very cool hand rig that works exceptionally well, minus my poor weight painting and such, but something that could animate very easily and could definitely help in the process of rigging a hand.